In June 1944, British soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy armed with a rifle that had been in service for nearly half a century. The short Magazine Lee-Enfield, designed in 1895 and formally adopted in 1907, remained the standard-issue weapon for Commonwealth forces. In contrast, the German soldiers carried the Karabiner 98K, a modernized version of the iconic Mauser action that had been perfected over decades. On paper, this shouldn't have worked. The German rifle was more accurate at long range, crafted from superior materials, and widely regarded as a pinnacle of bolt-action rifle design. Yet, British soldiers who captured German weapons on the battlefield often discarded them in favor of their Lee-Enfields. This wasn't out of sentimentality or stubbornness, but a matter of battlefield pragmatism honed by hard-earned experience. The Lee-Enfield story dates back to the 1880s when the British Army recognized the need for a repeating rifle using smokeless powder. Scottish-Canadian inventor James Paris Lee developed a revolutionary detachable box magazine system, and when combined with the rifling techniques at the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, the Magazine Lee-Enfield was born. It first saw action during the Second Boer War, and by 1907, after several modifications, the short Magazine Lee-Enfield Mark III, or SMLE, emerged. This iconic rifle would go on to serve in both world wars and many colonial conflicts. The rifle's longevity wasn't due to any single revolutionary feature, but rather a combination of practical design decisions that prioritized what actually mattered in combat. At the time, military thinking emphasized long-range accuracy, with European armies obsessed with hitting targets at distances of 800, 1,000, or even 1,500 yards. The Germans, particularly proud of their marksmanship, designed their Mauser rifles with longer barrels and tighter manufacturing tolerances. The British, however, took a different approach with the SMLE. They shortened the barrel to just 25.2 inches, making the rifle more maneuverable in trenches and vehicles. They accepted a slight sacrifice in long-range accuracy because their combat studies showed that most infantry engagements occurred within 300 yards. This view contradicted European military theories, but proved prescient once the realities of trench warfare became apparent in 1914. The Lee-Enfield's rear-locking bolt design also raised eyebrows among firearm experts. Most military rifles, including the Mauser, use a front-locking system where lugs near the chamber absorb the firing pressure. The Lee-Enfield's locking lug sat at the rear of the bolt, a design considered weaker and less precise. Critics argued this would never match the Mauser's precision. They were correct on the target range, but battlefields aren't target ranges, and the Lee-Enfield design offered advantages that outweighed its theoretical shortcomings. The longer bolt travel required by the rear-locking system made the rifle faster to cycle, and the action was more forgiving when exposed to dirt and debris. By 1939, when Britain again found itself at war with Germany, the SMLE was considered outdated, yet production ramped up instead of winding down, with factories in Britain, India, and Australia manufacturing millions more. British commanders weren't clinging to tradition. They understood that theoretical superiority doesn't always translate to battlefield performance. The British Army had set a training standard that seemed impossible to recruits at first. Every soldier was expected to fire 15 aimed rounds per minute from the bolt-action Lee-Enfield. The truly skilled could fire 30 rounds per minute. This became known as the Mad Minute and was crucial to the British Expeditionary Force's survival during the opening months of World War I. On August 23, 1914, at the Belgian town of Mons, around 70,000 British soldiers faced nearly 160,000 German troops. The Germans expected a quick victory over what they perceived as a small, outdated force. Instead, they encountered a wall of rifle fire so intense that they believed they were up against masked machine guns. The SMLE's design, optimized for speed, was a key factor. The bolt handle was angled at 60 degrees instead of the typical 90 degrees, reducing wrist rotation and allowing faster cycling between shots. The rifle's rear-locking bolt required the shooter to engage the firing pin during bolt closure rather than opening, making rapid fire more intuitive. Combined with relentless training, this made individual British soldiers formidable in combat. British musketry training was among the most rigorous in the world. Recruits spent weeks at rifle ranges before they received any other combat training. They practiced firing from various positions, standing, kneeling, sitting, and prone. They trained to reload quickly, with some soldiers able to swap a fresh 10-round magazine in under 3 seconds. They learned to estimate ranges by eye and adjust their sights accordingly. The SMLE's ladder sight, though outdated compared to German designs, was quicker to adjust and allowed for fast, accurate targeting in the heat of battle. This training in the rifle's design made the British infantry an efficient and effective fighting force, even with a weapon that was considered obsolete by the standards of time. Under pressure, you flipped a lever, slid the sight to the appropriate range marking, and locked it in place. No need for fine adjustments or overthinking, just pure combat speed. The qualification drill demanded hitting a 12-inch target at 300 yards 15 times within 60 seconds. This meant reloading a fresh magazine during the drill while maintaining accuracy. Soldiers who managed 20 hits earned marksman status. The legendary sergeant instructor Snooksall reportedly achieved 38 hits in 1 minute during a 1914 demonstration, though he had an assistant feeding him loaded magazines. The goal wasn't to break records. It was to instill muscle memory so deeply that rapid, accurate fire became automatic under the stress of battle. At Mons, German troops advancing in formation were decimated at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire. After-action reports detail entire German companies being halted by what they thought were machine guns firing from multiple positions. In reality, sections of 8 to 10 British riflemen were creating that volume of fire. A German lieutenant, captured later that week, told interrogators he had counted the rate of fire and estimated his unit was facing at least 20 machine guns. He was astounded to learn that bolt-action rifles could produce such rapid firepower. The British had just 4 machine guns a battalion at Mons. The rest was rifles, training, and the SMLE's rapid-fire capability doing precisely what it was designed to do. Trench warfare posed a nightmare for gun designers. What seemed perfect in a factory setting became a liability in the harsh conditions of the Western Front. Rifles endured days and weeks of exposure to rain, snow, and the unique, corrosive mud of Flanders, a clay-heavy soup that worked its way into every crevice. Soldiers lacked the luxury of maintaining their weapons according to peacetime manuals. No heated armory, no clean workspace, no proper cleaning supplies. You had what moisture you could shake off, maybe a rag if you were lucky, and whatever oil hadn't been used up in weeks. In these conditions, the Lee-Enfield excelled. While more advanced rifles failed, its secret was in its looseness. British manufacturing tolerances were intentionally looser than German standards, with more play and clearance between moving parts. To a precision-minded engineer, this appeared to be inferior craftsmanship. But to a soldier in a trench, it meant the difference between a rifle that worked and one that became a useless club. When mud or ice clogged the action, the Lee-Enfield generous clearances allowed it to cycle. The bolt might feel rough, but it would still move. The Mauser 98K, with its tighter tolerances and front-locking lugs near the chamber, would often bind and jam when debris accumulated. German soldiers found themselves frantically trying to clear their actions, while British troops kept firing. The Lee-Enfield's rear-locking bolt provided another survival advantage. The mainspring compressed only when you closed the bolt, requiring less force when opening it. If dirt or corrosion caused binding, you could still force the bolt open to clear a jam or eject a stuck case. The Mauser's front-locking design meant you fought against mainspring pressure while trying to break fouled lugs loose. In freezing conditions, when metal contracted and moisture turned to ice, this difference became critical. British troops reported in the winter of 1917 that their rifles still functioned, while German prisoners' rifles had frozen solid. The prisoners hadn't maintained their rifles anyways. They simply had less forgiving designs. Water resistance was another strength of the Lee-Enfield. The SMLE's magazine had a cutoff that allowed it to function as a single-shot weapon while keeping the magazine in reserve. More importantly, the magazine well had drainage. Any water inside could flow out, preventing corrosion or feeding malfunctions. In contrast, the Mauser's internal magazine, fed by stripper clips, had no such drainage. Water trapped inside mixed with gun oil and powder residue, forming corrosive paste. British armorers, salvaging German weapons after major offensives, often found rust and corrosion in Mauser magazines, even when the external metal appeared fine. The SMLEs with furniture also contributed to its reliability in ways that seemed counterintuitive. The rifle stock was made from walnut, usually Indian walnut, which was softer than the beechwood typically used in Mauser rifles. It absorbed impact without cracking, making it more durable when soldiers used their rifles as tools, hammering trench stakes, opening ammunition crates, or breaking ice. In contrast, the harder beechwood of Mauser stocks cracked under similar abuse. A cracked stock wasn't just cosmetic damage. It affected the rifle's accuracy and, if severe, could make the rifle dangerous to fire. British ordnance reports from the summer offensive indicated that Lee-Enfield rifles sent in for repair had far fewer stock failures and captured Mausers subjected to similar abuse. The Mauser 98 action is often hailed as the most successful bolt-action rifle design in history. Paul Mauser's 1898 design became the template for many countries, and a control-feed extractor guided the cartridge smoothly into the chamber. While the Mauser was undoubtedly a remarkable design, the SMLE practical advantages and the unforgiving conditions of trench warfare ensured it remained a reliable tool for British soldiers throughout World War I. The front-locking lug position directly at the chamber gave the Mauser rifle maximum support, where the pressure peaked during firing. The rifle's three-position safety allowed the bolt to be opened with the safety engaged for unloading. On paper, and in practice at the range, the Mauser represented the pinnacle of bolt-action engineering. German soldiers were trained to be marksmen, and their weapon reflected that focus on precision. A skilled German rifleman with a K98K could consistently outshoot a British soldier with the SMLE at 600 yards. However, wars are not won at 600 yards on a controlled range. The Mauser's strength was also its limitation. The tight tolerances that ensured precision made the action less forgiving. The controlled feed system, while theoretically more reliable, required the bolt to travel through a longer, more complex path. You had to lift the bolt handle a full 90 degrees, pull it back for a considerable distance, push the new round forward while ensuring it engaged the extractor properly, then rotate the handle back down. Each movement had to be deliberate and complete. Rush it, and you'd face a failure to feed or a double feed. Under stress, when your hands were cold or shaking and you needed to get rounds downrange quickly, that complexity became a liability. German military doctrine emphasized deliberate, aimed fire. Their training manual stress breath control, trigger squeeze, and a proper sight picture. A German soldier was expected to make every shot count, especially at longer ranges where the Mauser's superior accuracy came into play. This philosophy made sense in the context of late 19th century warfare, where engagements typically took place at longer distances, and ammunition was a limited resource. But by 1914, and certainly by 1939, infantry combat had evolved. Automatic weapons provided sustained fire, and artillery dominated the battlefield. The role of the infantryman had shifted toward rapid response at closer ranges, precisely where the SMLE's advantages emerged. The practical difference was evident in the rate of fire. A trained German soldier could fire about 10 to 12 aimed rounds per minute with a K98K. This was respectable, better than most other armies with similar rifles, but it was still half the SMLE's rate. In a 2-minute firefight, a British soldier could send 30 rounds downrange, while a German soldier would manage 24 at best. Those extra 6 rounds represented potential casualties inflicted or suppression fire to keep enemy heads down. Multiply that across a platoon, and the difference became decisive. German small unit tactics had to rely more heavily on their excellent milligram 34 and milligram 42 machine guns to provide the volume of fire that British sections could generate with rifles alone. The Mauser's longer barrel, 23.6 inches compared to the SMLE's 25.2 inches, gave it superior muzzle velocity and a flatter trajectory at range. German snipers particularly favored the K98K for this reason. But for the average infantryman, that extra accuracy potential was often wasted. Combat study from both world wars consistently showed that most soldiers couldn't effectively use their rifle's maximum accurate range under battlefield stress. The noise, confusion, fear, and physical exhaustion of combat degraded marksmanship far more than any inherent accuracy limitation of the weapon. The SMLE was accurate enough for the ranges where most fighting occurred, and its faster operation mattered more than precision. Most soldiers could not fully utilize the extended range potential anyway. Magazine capacity might seem like a minor detail, but in a firefight, it made all the difference. The Lee-Enfield could hold 10 rounds in a detachable box magazine, while the Mauser K98K held just 5 rounds in an internal magazine, fed from stripper clips. That 2-to-1 advantage fundamentally changed how soldiers fought. When a British section opened fire, they could sustain it twice as long before needing to reload. When they did reload, swapping magazines took roughly 3 seconds with a practice motion, drop the empty, insert a fresh one, chamber a round. A German soldier reloading his Mauser had to open the bolt, position a 5-round stripper clip in the guide, push the cartridges down with thumb pressure until they fed into the magazine, extract the empty clip, and chamber the first round. Even a well-trained soldier needed 6 to 8 seconds, and that was assuming the clip fed smoothly without jamming. The mathematics of small unit combat made this capacity difference multiply across an engagement. A standard British infantry section consisted of 10 men. In a sustained firefight, with all rifles firing, that section could deliver 100 rounds before anyone needed to reload. A comparable German squad of 10 men could deliver just 50 rounds. If the engagement lasted 2 minutes, and both sides maintained their trained rates of fire, the British section would send around 300 rounds downrange, while the German squad managed only 200 to 240. This wasn't just about ammunition expenditure, it was about maintaining continuous fire. While German soldiers were reloading, British soldiers were still firing. That sustained pressure kept the enemy suppressed, preventing them from maneuvering and creating opportunities for flanking or advancing. The detachable magazine system gave British soldiers tactical flexibility that internal magazines could not match. You could carry loaded magazines in pouches on your webbing, ready for use at a moment's notice. In standard British battle order, soldiers carried 2 pouches, each holding 5 10-round magazines, 50 rounds in easily accessible magazines, plus an additional 50 loose rounds in bandoliers for reloading during lulls in fighting. This meant a soldier could fire 50 aimed rounds in under 4 minutes without needing to fumble with loose cartridges. In contrast, German soldiers carried their ammunition in pouches designed for stripper clips, which were efficient for the Mauser's design, but meant every reload required handling small metal clips under stress. If a clip was dropped in the mud or grass, recovering those 5 rounds became a challenge. The Lee-Enfield's magazine cutoff feature added another level of practicality. By engaging the cutoff, the SMLE became a single-shot rifle while keeping the magazine fully loaded in reserve. This feature made sense in situations where ammunition conservation was important, but you might suddenly need rapid fire. You could pick off targets individually, feeding 1 round at a time, then instantly release the cutoff to unleash the full 10-round magazine if the situation escalated. The Mauser lacked a similar feature. You either used the magazine or loaded individual rounds, with no smooth transition between the two. Reloading under pressure revealed another advantage of the SMLE. The magazine well was generously sized and beveled, so even in darkness or when exhausted, soldiers could guide a magazine into place by feel. The magazine catch was positioned where the trigger finger naturally reached during a reload, making it easy to perform under stress. One press, the empty magazine dropped free, and with a quick motion, a fresh one was inserted. The Mauser's internal magazine meant there was nothing to drop or insert, but once the 5 rounds were used, the rifle had to be reloaded 1 round or clip at a time. German soldiers envied the British magazine system, even as they took pride in their rifles' other qualities. Private Harold Bolton of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment described an interesting incident after the First Battle of Ypres in October 1914. His section had overrun a German position and found several abandoned Mauser rifles in excellent condition. The men examined them with professional interest, as German propaganda had claimed these weapons were superior to anything the British carried. Bolton Sargent, a seasoned soldier with 12 years of service, worked the Mauser's action, sighted it down the barrel, and handed it back with a simple comment: "Fine weapon for a Sunday shoot. I'll keep me Lee-Enfield for killing Germans. Thanks." The captured rifles were turned over to headquarters, and every man in the section kept his SMLE. This preference for the Lee-Enfield was a recurring theme throughout both World Wars. After major engagements, British and Commonwealth troops often had the opportunity to acquire German weapons. Some kept them as souvenirs, while others used captured ammunition when their own supplies were low. But when given a genuine choice, soldiers overwhelmingly preferred their Lee-Enfields. Corporal Jack Thomas, who fought in North Africa with the 8th Army, kept a diary that survived the war. In January 1943, after fighting around the Mareth line, he described his platoon stripping a German supply dump. They took ammunition, food, and even a few MP-40 submachine guns, but the captured K98K rifles were left behind. Thomas wrote, "The lads won't trade their rifles. Jerry's look smart, but ours shoots faster, and that's what counts when they're running at you." Lieutenant William Douglas Home, serving with the Royal Armoured Corps, recorded his observations in letters that were later published. After interrogating German prisoners in Normandy in July 1944, he noted their respect for British marksmanship and rate of fire. One German sergeant, when asked about the British firepower, insisted they were facing automatic weapons during an engagement near Caen. When Douglas Home explained it was bolt-action rifles, the sergeant didn't believe him initially. He counted the incoming fire and thought no bolt-action rifle could maintain that volume. Home then demonstrated the mad minute technique with an SMLE. The sergeant's expression, Home wrote, was one of respect and annoyance at having been bested by what he considered obsolete equipment. The perspectives on the Lee-Enfield weren't limited to British forces. Indian Army troops, who formed a significant portion of the Commonwealth forces, were equally devoted to the rifle, known as the .303 for its caliber. Sepoy Jien Singh of the 4th Indian Division wrote to his family in Punjabi about the East African campaign against Italian forces in 1941. He described trying a Mauser and finding it too slow for battle, good only for careful shooting. Indian troops had used the Lee-Enfield since 1905, and soldiers from the northwest frontier to Burma consistently praised its reliability and speed. Indian troops fought in some of the harshest conditions during the war: desert heat, monsoon humidity, and mountain cold, and their reports repeatedly emphasized that the SMLE performed when other rifles failed. Australian soldiers were equally pragmatic about their equipment. If something worked better, they used it regardless of regulations. Their experience mirrored the British and Indian soldiers' preference for the Lee-Enfield, especially when it outperformed more advanced rifles under real combat conditions. Sergeant Bill Griffiths, who fought at Tobruk and El Alamein with the 9th Australian Division, kept notes that formed the basis of a post-war memoir. He described how captured German equipment was constantly evaluated. Australian troops were quick to adopt German stick grenades, which they found superior to the British Mills bombs for certain tasks. They also scavenged German optics and machine guns. However, Griffiths noted that in all his time in North Africa and later in the Pacific, he never saw an Australian soldier voluntarily replace his Lee-Enfield with a captured rifle. The attitude, he wrote, was simple: the bloody thing works. Shoot straight enough and shoots fast. Why would you change? The North African desert tested weapons in ways that European battlefields never could. Sand worked its way into every mechanism with the persistence of water. Temperature swings, from freezing nights to 120-degree days, caused metal parts to expand and contract. The moisture from coastal regions combined with the sand to form an abrasive paste that wore down moving parts in weeks. British forces fighting across Libya, Egypt, and Tunisia from 1940 to 1943 found that the SMLE handled these extreme conditions better than almost any other rifle in theater. German troops respected the Mauser's precision, but their field manual contained extensive sections on desert maintenance, detailing special procedures to keep the K98K functioning. British manuals simply advised soldiers to shake out the sand and keep firing. The loose tolerances that engineers had criticized became a lifesaver in the desert. Sand that would jam a Mauser's tie to action simply fell through the Lee-Enfield's more generous clearances. Australian and New Zealand troops at Tobruk fought through sandstorms that reduced visibility to just arm's length. When the sand cleared, their rifles still worked. The Italian Carcano rifles used by opposing forces often seized completely after sandstorms, requiring full disassembly. Even the Mauser required significant cleaning before it could function reliably again. British armourer report from the siege of Tobruk noted that Lee-Enfields came back for repair with sand literally caked inside the action. Yet, most still functioned well enough for combat. One report from August 1941 documented a rifle that had fired over 200 rounds during a 3-day engagement without cleaning, yet still operated when inspected. Burma and the Pacific Theater presented another set of extremes: torrential monsoon rains, jungle humidity that kept metal perpetually damp, and mud that made Flanders look dry by comparison. The British 14th Army fighting in Burma from 1942 to 1945 operated in conditions where metal rusted overnight and wooden stock swelled from moisture absorption. Japanese Arisaka rifles, well designed in their own right, suffered from humidity affecting their chrome-lined bores, which caused feeding issues. The SMLE's unlined bore required more frequent cleaning, but proved less prone to the pitting and corrosion that plagued chrome barrels when the plating failed. The walnut stalks absorbed moisture without the dramatic swelling that affected the denser woods used in Japanese and some German rifles. British troops operating in the Arakan and along the Chindwin River often went weeks without proper weapon maintenance facilities. Sergeant Charles Carfry of the Border Regiment described his rifle after 3 weeks of continuous jungle operations in early 1944. The metal was spotted with surface rust, the stock had turned nearly black from moisture and handling, and the barrel was foul from hundreds of rounds without proper cleaning. Yet, when his unit engaged Japanese positions at the Nakadok Pass, the rifle functioned perfectly. Carfry noted that he had seen captured Japanese rifles in far better cosmetic condition, but they wouldn't cycle reliably due to moisture affecting their tighter actions, causing feeding problems. The Arctic presented yet another test. British and Canadian forces operating in Norway in 1940, and later Allied troops in Northern Europe during the winter of 1944-45, faced temperatures that dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. Lubricants thickened into gel, metal contracted, and moisture froze instantly. The German solution was to use minimal lubrication and special cold weather oils, but these supplies weren't always available to frontline troops. The British solution was simpler: remove all oil from the Lee-Enfield's action and run it dry. The rifle's design allowed it to function without lubrication in extreme cold. Canadian troops fighting in the Scheldt estuary during November 1944 reported their Lee-Enfields working reliably in sleet and freezing rain, while German prisoners' rifles froze and became inoperable. The Enfield's rear-locking action meant less force was needed to open the bolt, which mattered when metal contracted in the cold, and every movement required extra effort. The service life of the Lee-Enfield tells a story that contradicts conventional wisdom about military technology. The rifle entered British service in 1895 as a Magazine Lee-Enfield, evolved into the SMLE in 1907, and remained a standard British and Commonwealth infantry weapon through World War II. But its story didn't end in 1945. India continued to manufacture Lee-Enfields until the 1980s. The rifle saw combat in Korea, Malaya, Kenya, Suez, and the Falklands. Canadian Rangers in the Arctic continued to issue the No. 4 MKI variant until 2015, proving that its durability and versatility transcended time and changing battle conditions. 120 years after the Lee-Enfield design first appeared, no other military bolt-action rifle has come close to matching its service record. Despite its technical excellence, the Mauser 98K was replaced within a few years of Germany's defeat. The American Springfield 1903, the Japanese Arisaka, and the Soviet Mauser Nagant were all phased out within a generation after World War II. Only the Lee-Enfield persisted. This longevity wasn't due to nostalgia or bureaucratic inertia, but rather the recognition that the rifle got the fundamentals right in ways that mattered more than mere specifications. The British didn't aim to create the most accurate or precisely manufactured rifle. They built a rifle optimized for the essential needs of infantry combat: sustained rapid fire, reliability in adverse conditions, and simplicity of operation under stress. These priorities may have seemed pedestrian compared to the Mauser's engineering elegance, but they proved far more valuable than precision that most soldiers couldn't even exploit. The SMLE represented a philosophy where effectiveness in the field trumped theoretical excellence on paper. Modern military small arms development has consistently relearned the Lee-Enfield's lessons. The M16 rifle's early failures in Vietnam were partly due to tight tolerances that caused jams in jungle conditions, the same problem the Mauser faced in mud and sand. The solution was to loosen tolerances and add chrome lining, essentially applying principles that the SMLE had embodied since 1907. The AK-47's legendary reliability comes from generous clearances that allow it to function when filled with date, exactly the same principle that made the Lee-Enfield work in the trenches 70 years earlier. Contemporary military doctrine now emphasizes volume of fire and rapid engagement at shorter ranges, rather than long-range precision marksmanship, the same philosophy that led Britain to prioritize the mad minute over 1,000-yard accuracy. The rifle story offers broader lessons about military technology and procurement. Advanced engineering doesn't automatically translate into battlefield superiority. The Mauser was objectively more sophisticated, with controlled feed, dual front-locking lugs, and superior metallurgy. But sophistication creates complexity, and complexity creates failure points. The Lee-Enfield succeeded through simplicity and forgiveness. Its loose tolerances, rear-locking bolts, and straightforward manual of arms made it easier to use and harder to break. Soldiers didn't need to be expert gunsmiths to keep it running. This was crucial because wars are fought not only by career soldiers but by conscripts and reservists. A weapon that only performs excellently in expert hands is less valuable than one that performs adequately in anyone's hands. The economic lesson is equally relevant. Britain produced roughly 17 million Lee-Enfields across all variants from 1895 to the 1950s. The manufacturing process used simpler tooling and less precise machining than the Mauser required. This allowed factories to set up faster, workers to be trained more quickly, and production costs to be kept lower. During World War II, when industrial capacity determined how many rifles an army could field, the SMLE's manufacturability became a strategic advantage. Germany produced excellent rifles, but never enough of them. Britain, however, produced good enough rifles in sufficient quantity to arm not just its own forces, but also to provide weapons to resistance movements in allied nations across the globe. Adequate weapons in sufficient quantity beat superior weapons in limited numbers. The Lee-Enfield proved that old doesn't mean obsolete, and modern doesn't guarantee better. It showed that understanding how soldiers actually fight matters more than theoretical performance. Most importantly, it proved that the best weapon isn't the one that wins design competitions. It's the one that keeps working when everything else has failed. The soldiers' trust in their Lee-Enfields wasn't due to stubbornness. It was because the rifle kept them alive and got them home. The preference for their outdated rifle over German modern weapons was not a matter of resistance, but a matter of wisdom.